Among Us. Chapter 1. Jeb Watkins stood on the porch of his remote ranch house, gazing out at the expansive scrubland of the high desert plateau. The first hints of dawn were creeping over the distant mesas, casting a pallid light on the scattered juniper trees and sagebrush. As owner and operator of the Bar W cattle ranch, it was Jeb's daily ritual to be up before sunrise to start the long list of chores necessary on a working ranch. But this morning, something felt off. There was an eerie stillness in the arid morning air. None of the usual sounds of the desert stirred, no scurrying lizards, chirping birds, or foraging rabbits. Even the livestock in the corral were silent and on edge. Jeb slowly stepped off the porch, his worn cowboy boots crunching on the gravel path as he made his way towards the barn. He slipped through the slightly ajar wooden doors and clicked on the flashlight on his belt. He swept the dim beam around the interior, past the hay bales and farming equipment. Everything seemed to be in order. Yet Jeb couldn't escape the sense of foreboding that clung to him, like the dusty trail dust on his hat and clothes. He turned towards the stalls where his small herd of cattle were penned up. But rather than the usual languid eyes and gentle lowing that greeted him, the animals were stirred up, bumping against the walls of their stalls nervously. "Easy there," Jeb said gently, reaching out a hand towards a skittish calf that shied away from him. As he drew nearer, his nostrils filled with the unmistakable tang of fresh blood. Heart pounding, Jeb hurried to the last stall and swung the beam of light inside. He staggered back with a choked gasp. The mutilated carcass of his prized quarter horse lay in a congealed pool of crimson. Jagged slashes had ripped open its belly and legs, entrails spilled out onto the hay-strewn floor. Jeb's hands trembled, his mind reeling. This was no coyote or mountain lion attack. Something ripped that horse apart with intent, almost human-like cruelty. As the first inkling of dawn's light spilled into the barn, Jeb saw the gruesome message written in blood on the stall wall. "This is only the beginning." Chapter 2. Jeb burst back into the house, breathless and wild-eyed. His wife Sally was up starting breakfast for the kids in the kitchen. At the sight of Jeb's panic-stricken face, she froze. "Jeb, what on earth?" "Sally, take the kids and lock yourselves in our bedroom now," Jeb said urgently, grabbing his hunting rifle from above the fireplace. "You're scaring me, Jeb. What's happened?" Sally asked. Something killed Eclipse, ripped him to shreds in the barn," Jeb said between heaving breaths. "It doesn't seem natural, and it left a message saying it was just the beginning." Sally gasped, her face draining of color. She called for Jimmy and Beth and hurried them from their rooms to the master bedroom, latching the door behind them. Jeb quickly scanned the ranch yard through the living room window, rifle cocked in his tense hands. Nothing stirred outside, except the limp windsock on the barn. But something evil had crept into his world under the cover of night. As a third-generation cattle rancher, Jeb knew the harsh realities of frontier living. He'd put down his share of suffering livestock after coyote attacks, and nursed newborn calves through freezing desert nights. But nothing could explain the vicious brutality in that barn. And nothing could shake the bone-deep sense of dread Jeb felt when he imagined that malevolent presence turning its sights on his beloved family. He would defend his wife and children to his last breath against this unseen menace. They were isolated out here, the nearest neighbor miles away, with no one to rely on but themselves. As Jeb kept grim vigil at the window, shotgun held ready, he uttered a fervent prayer. "Lord, protect my family from whatever evil has come to this land. Guard us from the valley of death and deliver us from fear. Give me the strength and wisdom to save my wife and children. Chapter 3. Farmer John Boyd was the first to reach Sheriff Ana Lopez about the mutilated heifer found in his pasture that morning. But he wouldn't be the last. By noon, Sheriff Lopez's phone at the Serenity Valley County Sheriff's Office was ringing off the hook with reports of horrifically slain livestock all over the ranches surrounding the remote town. Small farmers like the Watkinses and Boyds were the lifeblood of their rural community, and panic was starting to spread. Sheriff Lopez tried to keep her voice steady and calm as she took the calls, reassuring the ranchers that she would investigate. But inwardly, her gut churned. In her 15 years serving Serenity Valley, she'd never seen anything like this before: animals practically torn limb from limb and disemboweled overnight without a trace. She quickly deputized her most trusted officer, Chad Mills, to help look into the matter. She knew him to have a good head on his shoulders, despite his youth and relative inexperience. As they drove out in her cruiser to inspect the various ranches, she voiced her concerns. "I got a bad feeling about these killings, Mills. This wasn't done by any coyote or mountain cat. What kind of animal could do this? Almost surgical-like, without leaving tracks or traces." She shook her head grimly. Mills was silent, face pensive as he took in the scenes of carnage at each ranch. As the day wore on, the injuries became even more disturbing. Some looked like they had acid poured on them, flesh melting clean off. Others had organs meticulously removed and arranged around the body. By late afternoon, after confirming 17 slaughtered animals at 5 different farms, Sheriff Lopez's unease had turned to cold fear. No animal she knew of could have done this. As she stared down at the eerily precise removal of a cow's digestive tract, she felt certain of one thing: she was looking at the work of a sadistic and disturbed mind. Nightfall brought blessed relief from the gory side of the day. Sheriff Lopez wearily dragged herself to her office desk to start paperwork, but her mind kept drifting. Visions of blood and viscera mingled with her fears about what could have committed such atrocities. As the night deepened, she found herself praying that the light of dawn would burn away this evil that had seeped into her town. But in her heart, she knew this was only the beginning. Chapter 4. At first light, Sheriff Lopez's radio crackled to life with a disturbing report: old man Hawthorne hadn't shown up for his usual breakfast at Sally Me's diner, and he wasn't answering his door or phone. The reclusive war vet lived alone on an isolated scrap of land out by Miller's Creek, prime coyote country. Anna felt obligated to check on the eccentric but harmless old-timer. She decided to swing by the Watkinses' ranch on her way. After hearing poor Jeb's panicked voice on the phone yesterday, she wanted to talk to him in person, see if she could get any leads on what he'd seen in that barn. Pulling up the dirt road, she spotted Jeb out by the corral repairing a section of split-rail fencing. His usual easy, loping gait seemed weighted down, shoulders slumped. Dark circles underscored his eyes. Anna figured he hadn't slept a wink last night. "Morning, Jeb," she said gently as she approached him. "How are Sally and the kids holding up?" Jeb shook his head wearily as he wiped the sweat off his brow. "About as well as can be expected. We're all shaken up after, well, what happened here. Sally's terrified to let the kids out of her sight." Anna shared a meaningful look with Jeb. "I know this is hard, but I need you to tell me everything you saw and felt when you found Eclipse yesterday." Jeb's eyes took on a haunted, hollow look as he recounted the details: the ominous stillness, the animal panic, and the sheer savagery of the wounds. "Like I told you on the phone, that was no coyote or wolf, Sheriff," he said, shaking his head. "I can't explain it. but this evil had intent behind it. That message on the wall. He trailed off, clenching his jaw. Anna gripped his arm reassuringly. I know this sounds crazy, Jeb, but I believe you. I've seen things that don't sit right either. Something sinister is going on here, and I aim to get to the bottom of it. But right now, folks around here are scared and need to feel safe. I could really use your help keeping an eye out, maybe even lending a gun if need be. Jeb searched her eyes, then gave a resolute nod. I ain't gonna let this evil come near my family or neighbors. You have my word on that. He fetched his shotgun and box of shells from the house and headed out to patrol the grounds, glad to have an ally in the fight against this nameless, faceless menace. Chapter 5. Mayor Tom Wilson rapped his knuckles impatiently on the old oak desk in his office. He was tired of Sheriff Lopez stirring up the locals with wild stories about animal mutilations and sinister forces at work. He'd worked too hard to build up Serenity Valley's reputation as a quiet, family-friendly tourist destination. The last thing he needed was hysteria about some deranged serial killer terrorizing the town. Anna stood her ground across the desk, mouth set in a thin line. With all due respect, Mayor, I can't ignore what's happening out there. My job is to protect this community. Your job is to uphold civic order, the mayor replied coolly. Rushing off half-cocked about shadowy killers and supernatural evil will just sow panic. Now I appreciate your enthusiasm, but I think your lack of big city law enforcement experience may have you spooked. Anna bristled. I know this area better than anyone, and I'm telling you, I've never seen animal attacks like this. The wounds almost look surgical. Some ranch families are too scared to even leave their homes. The mayor held up a hand. I won't have you spreading alarmist rumors. Listen, it's obvious we have a very sick individual on our hands. Some drifter with mental issues probably responsible. He handed her a flyer with a number to call for the FBI. The feds? Don't you think we need all hands on deck here? Anna asked incredulously. The mayor shook his head. Let them handle it, in the meantime, enforce the curfew and focus on calming folks down. Assure them we have every resource working on this, only clear, concise facts, no wild speculation. Anna looked down at the FBI flyer. She had serious misgivings, but she was up against City Hall politics now. Let's hope the feds get here fast then, she said tersely, turning on her heel. As the door closed behind her, Mayor Wilson sank into his leather chair, mopping his glistening bald head with a handkerchief. He thought of all the tourist booking cancellations that morning, the business owners and ranchers demanding answers. This hysteria was threatening to sink the town. He prayed the feds could clean up this mess quickly and quietly so he could get back to his re-election campaign. Serenity Valley's peace and prosperity depended on it. Chapter 6. Jeb sat at the kitchen table, staring blankly into his untouched coffee as dawn's light seeped through the window. He hadn't slept all night standing sentry on the porch with his shotgun across his lap. Every hour that dragged by without incident should have reassured him. But instead it just wound the coil of dread inside him tighter. The floorboards creaked behind him, and he turned to see Sally shuffling into the kitchen, robe wrapped tightly around herself. Dark circles underscored her eyes. You kept watch all night again, didn't you? She said softly. It wasn't a question. She knew her husband too well. Jeb gave a silent nod, then gestured to the chair next to him. Sally sat down and wrapped her hands around his with a sympathetic sigh. I know you're just trying to keep us safe, but you need to keep up your strength too, she said, smoothing back his disheveled hair gently. Why don't you come get a few hours rest? I'll watch the kids and keep an ear out. Jeb started to object, but realized his body felt like it was encased in concrete, every limb and muscle leaden with exhaustion. He relented with a nod and shuffled off to the bedroom, collapsing onto the mattress fully clothed. But despite his bone-weary fatigue, sleep eluded him. Ghastly images of Eclipse's mangled corpse kept rearing up in his mind. A few fitful hours later, he rose feeling almost worse than before he lay down. Sally and the kids were in the living room, the TV on low. Jimmy and Beth colored pictures on the floor while Sally folded laundry, but Jeb could sense the undercurrent of fear in the room. Needing some air, he stepped outside to get the mail, the afternoon sun glaring in his eyes. As he flipped through the usual bills and circulars, one letter caught his attention. It was addressed simply to the Watkins family in jagged, uneven handwriting. No return address. Puzzled, he tore it open. Jeb's blood turned to ice water as he read the crudely scrawled message. I see you. I will come for you soon. Sweet dreams. The letter fluttered from Jeb's trembling hands as the revelation crashed over him. Whatever evil had desecrated his barn was now targeting his family directly. This was no longer just an ominous threat, but a sinister promise from something utterly inhuman. And it was toying with them. Jeb cast a panicked glance back at the house, at his wife and kids laughing obliviously inside. He had to protect them from this monster, no matter the cost. Chapter 7. Jeb stormed into the sheriff's office, the chilling letter clutched in his shaking hand. Anna looked up from her desk in surprise. Whoa there, Jeb, what's got you so riled? She asked with concern. Jeb wordlessly slapped the letter down on her desk. Anna scanned it quickly, her brow furrowing. Where did you get this? She asked. It came in the mail, addressed to my whole family, Jeb said breathlessly. It knows where we live, Anna. This evil thing is coming for us next. Anna turned the letter over with her pen, feeling the hair on the back of her neck prickle. Any idea who could have sent this? Jeb shook his head. It's not human. Whatever it is, you know that, same as me. Anna met his frightened but determined gaze steadily. She picked up her office phone. I'm calling Chad Mills, and we're coming out to your place first thing. We'll search the grounds, set up a patrol. I'll request backup deputies too. Appreciate it, Anna, but I don't know if even a whole squadron can stop this thing if it set its sights on us, Jeb said grimly. Anna squeezed his shoulder. Maybe not, but we can sure as hell try in the meantime. You focus on protecting your family best you can. Now, I don't want to worry Sally more, but is she prepared if anything should happen? Evacuation plan? Bug out bag? Jeb nodded reluctantly. She doesn't know all the details, but we're ready in case of emergency. I just pray it don't come to that. Me too, Jeb, Anna said heavily. But we're up against something beyond our reckoning here. After stopping at the hardware store for plywood boards and extra shells, Jeb drove home as quickly as his old truck could rumble. He spent the afternoon barricading windows and gathering provisions into bug-out bags. That night, after locking Sally and the kids in the master bedroom again, he took up his post on the porch with his rifle across his knees. As the inky darkness settled over the desert, his vigilance only grew more unwavering. The evil had named its target. And come hell or worse, he would defend his family or die trying. Chapter 8. The creature drifted silently through the shadows between the sagebrush and juniper trees, drawn by the scent of fear emanating from the ranch house ahead. It had no name in any human tongue. It simply was an apex predator from a distant world older than humankind itself. It had feasted leisurely upon the livestock in the surrounding area for weeks, testing its prodigious hunting abilities in sport. But now it hungered for something more, the piquant taste of human terror and agony. And it had singled out the man called Jeb as harboring a spirit both stubborn and savagely protective of his family, an alluring challenge. The family's own latent psychic aura also intrigued the creature. It sensed untapped potential in them, unlike the dull cattle it had toyed with. Through the second-story window, it could feel the waves of panic and worry pulsing from the female, and the smaller bright nodes of energy that were the younglings. The electronic ambient vibrations of this modern dwelling were the only strange element to its ancient senses. The creature's pupils dilated black in anticipation. It took no interest in the other bumbling humans who had come snooping around recently. It was time to feed. Moving with preternatural speed, it raced on all four limbs up the side of the house. It dug cruel claws into the clapboard siding and perched upside down outside the children's bedroom window. Through the gap in the curtains, it peered inside. The smaller humans lay wrapped in their blankets, faces still and peaceful in slumber. It would take the older ones first to heighten the fear and desperation in the father. Their small bodies would make for an easy kill. The creature extended a single talon and delicately tapped on the glass, scratching out a jagged line. The younglings stirred, but did not wake. It scratched louder with hunger, making the pain rattle. The smaller one sat bolt upright, eyes wide. Her mouth opened in a scream, but no sound emerged. Excellent, it had muted her cries telepathically so as not to alert the others yet. It slid the window slowly open, malice dripping from its jaws. The youngling thrashed in her covers, mute screams choked in her throat. As it stuck its head inside the room, drool sizzling on the floor, the door suddenly splintered open. There stood the father, ejecting some projectile weapon at the creature. It snarled and released its hold on the window, dropping back down into the darkness. The satisfying reek of terror lingered as it slunk away. It would return once their guard was down again to finish the hunt. The shots from Jeb's shotgun splintered the window frame as the creature released its hold and disappeared into the night. Jeb's heart slammed against his ribs as he rushed into the kids' bedroom. Little Beth lay wide-eyed and whimpering, struggling against the blankets tangled around her small body. Jeb swept her up, checking her over for any sign of injury as she finally found her scream. "Hush now, you're all right," he soothed, carrying her from the room as Jimmy began to wail too. Sally came running down the hall, crying out at the sight of the shattered window and Jeb clutching Beth. He quickly assured her both kids were unhurt before handing Beth off to her mother. "I was trying to get in, but I chased it off," Jeb said breathlessly, pushing past them to the living room window. He scanned the yard again, but saw nothing except shadows. Sally sobbed as she tried to comfort her screaming children. "Oh God, I thought we were safe indoors at least," she choked out. Jeb's jaw clenched, fury and fear twisting in his gut. This thing wasn't just hunting livestock now. It'd come after his family, his children. And it would try again, he was certain of it. He grabbed more shells from his dwindling stock and reloaded his shotgun. In the distance, a coyote howled mournfully. Dawn was still hours away. A long night lay ahead, and Jeb knew then he would not sleep again until this creature was dead by his own hands. Chapter 9. Over an hour passed without further signs of the intruder. But Jeb maintained his tireless watch, shotgun trained on the yard. Sally stayed up with the kids, whispering soothing words of comfort to them. As the first dim light seeped over the horizon, the police radio on Jeb's hip crackled to life. "Come in, this is Sheriff Lopez. Jeb, you there?" Jeb snatched up the handset. "I'm here." Anna's voice came through, clipped and tense. "We got big trouble, Jeb. I'm out on Route 15, headed your way. Chad's tailing behind. The Peterson family. It's a bloodbath here. We're gonna need your help." Jeb closed his eyes, uttering a silent prayer for the innocent lives lost. "What do you need?" he asked grimly. "Grab any weapons you have. We're rounding up an armed posse to hunt this thing down before it kills again. It's gone too far now. This ends today." Jeb didn't hesitate. "I'll be ready when you get here. Just promise me one thing, Sheriff." "Name it." "When we find this monster, the killing shot is mine." A pause. "It's a deal. See you shortly." The radio cut off. Jeb placed a call to Sally Mee, the chatty older woman who ran the local diner. He knew she'd watch the kids on short notice. After dropping them off, he raced to meet up with the sheriff and her deputy. His hands shook with adrenaline and rage as he sped down the lonely desert roads. He found them a mile out from the Peterson farm, along with 2 other volunteer deputies, solemnly arming themselves from the trunk of Anna's cruiser shotguns, rifles, ammo. Wordlessly, Jeb joined them, slotting shells into his shotgun. Jaws clenched, eyes hard as flint, they set off across the fields towards the sheriff's truck in the distance, not knowing what horrors awaited. But Jeb knew one thing for certain: after what this demon had done, after the lives it had destroyed, he would see it dead or walk into his own grave trying. Chapter 10. Jeb crept through the darkened farmhouse, hyper-alert senses tuned to any unnatural sound or presence. Inside, it was a scene from a slaughterhouse. The other armed men had cleared out to secure the perimeter. Only Anna stayed close behind Jeb as he moved silently through the carnage. In the living room, the remains of the Peterson parents were strewn about in poses of terror, as if they had been twisted apart. Upstairs, the shriveled corpses of the 2 young boys were contorted on their beds like discarded dolls. Bile rose in Jeb's throat at the seeming depravity and ease with which this devil ended their lives. Stepping back outside, Jeb struggled to steady his emotions. He had to be ice, no grief, no mercy. Anna's face was stoic, but her eyes stormy. She gave Jeb a solemn nod. "It's still here, watching us," she said under her breath. Jeb scanned the skeletal trees bordering the property, seeing nothing but shadows. Still, he felt the truth of her words in his bones. Its presence oozed malice and cunning. "We need to draw it out into the open," Anna said. As if on cue, a wailing cry rang out from the barn, followed by popping gunshots. "The deputy!" Anna shouted, breaking into a sprint. Jeb chased after her. Inside the barn, they found fresh blood splatters, but no sign of the deputy or his assailant. Only a gaping hole ripped in the rear wall, hay and splintered boards scattered about. Anna rushed for her radio to call for backup, while Jeb ventured deeper into the barn, shotgun ready. The attack came from the rafters above. Jeb reacted on pure instinct as the creature pounced, barely rolling clear as it hit the ground. He fired off 2 shots, but the thing was impossibly fast, scrambling behind a tractor. Jeb only glimpsed a flash of claws and mottled flesh, unlike any animal's. It taunted him with an unnatural shriek, toying with him. Jeb fired again towards the sound as Anna came running. "Did you get it?" she yelled. "I winged it maybe, but we gotta corner it," Jeb shouted back. Before he could react, a shadow detached itself from the wall and lunged, knocking the sheriff down. Anna cried out as its claws raked her side, shredding through her vest. Jeb unloaded his shotgun at point-blank range with a bellow of fury. The creature recoiled from the hits, but immediately melted into the shadows again. Jaw clenched, Jeb helped Anna to her feet, her face drained of color. "We're outmatched here, Jeb," she gasped, pressing a hand to her bleeding ribs. "It's too late for me. Get yourself to safety." With that, she turned and fired a barrage of cover shots into the dark as she backed rapidly towards the doors. Jeb hesitated only a second before falling back with her. As they burst out into the daylight, Anna wheezed into her radio officer down. "Intruders still loose on Peterson Farm. Request medevac." Before she could finish, a black shadow erupted from the barn, and everything descended into chaos. Chapter 11. Jeb watched in mute horror as the creature seized the sheriff in its gnarled grip and seemed to melt with her into a swirling vortex of shadow. 1 second Anna was there, the next she was simply gone. No blood, no struggle, just gone. Voices yelled from across the field as Chad Mills and 2 other deputies came sprinting towards the commotion guns blazing. The creature let out an ear-piercing shriek from somewhere near the farmhouse, and seconds later, the deputies began firing at each other in confusion. "It's taking on our forms," Chad screamed as he grappled with his doppelganger. Before Jeb's disbelieving eyes, one of the deputies shape-shifted into the pale, hairless creature mid-run. It scuttled behind the house, bulbous head swiveling grotesquely. The true Chad got the upper hand on his double and came stumbling over to Jeb, clutching a bleeding arm. "Anna called for backup, then I saw that thing take her," he panted. "We gotta regroup, wait for the real reinforcements." Jeb shook his head fiercely as the other deputy continued wrestling his changeling attacker across the field. "That thing is picking us off. We end this now." Ignoring Chad's protests, Jeb cocked his shotgun and stalked towards the farmhouse. He knew the demon was cornered now. He would root it out of its lair if he had to burn the whole place down. As he rounded the porch, the mutated creature sprang at him from the bushes. Jeb fired point blank, shredding its torso. It let out an ungodly scream, but kept coming, swiping the gun from Jeb's grip with unnatural force. The next instant it was on top of him, clawing and snapping as they smashed through the porch railing together. Jeb managed to wedge his forearm under its throat to stop the gnashing teeth inches from his face. Chad emptied his pistol at the thing from a few feet away, but it barely flinched. Jeb cried out as its claws raked his sides, its strength far superior to any man's. Just as his arm was about to give out, the creature let out a deafening shriek and released him. Chad grabbed Jeb and dragged him away from the writhing, melting creature as it thrashed in a growing pool of its own neon blood. But even with its insides slashed open, the thing refused to die. Its black eyes burned with hellish hatred at Jeb as it gurgled its last breaths. With a final snarling cough, the creature lay still at last. Hardly believing it was over, Jeb scrambled to his feet and aimed his reloaded shotgun at its misshapen head. But before he could fire, the body disintegrated into a noxious black vapor and vanished before their eyes. Chapter 12. Jeb sat on the back porch of the sheriff's office, gazing at the rising sun without really seeing it. Despite the chaos and bloodshed he'd endured over the past weeks, today was the first time he truly felt drained and defeated. Sheriff Anna was gone. Likely dead, her body teleported away by that thing to who knew where. And that creature itself had escaped wounded, but still alive. Even putting 100 shotgun rounds through it hadn't been enough to finish it off. Other officers had shown up shortly after the incident once backup finally responded to Anna's garbled distress call. But by then, the creature had vanished. All they found was blood, bullet casings, and the dazed, wounded men it had left behind. It was little comfort to know Chad and the others would physically recover from the attack. It wasn't just the gruesome violence Jeb had witnessed that disturbed him. He realized now the evil they were up against had powers and resilience beyond human comprehension. Bullets and brute force meant nothing to a demon that could regrow shredded flesh and steal faces at will. His family was still in danger. Even this town's small police force was no match for it. If there was any hope of defeating this nightmare creature, it couldn't be through force alone. Only God knew what was required to conquer genuine evil. Perhaps real courage meant being willing to sacrifice oneself if that's what it took to save those he loved most. His life would be a small price for Sally and the kids' safety. He knew then that if the chance came to destroy this monster for good, he would take it, no matter the cost. With new conviction, Jeb strode back inside. Deputy Chad looked up from his desk, face weary but determined to. "You holding up, friend?" Chad asked. Jeb met his gaze with a fierce light in his eyes. "I aim to end this one way or another, but I'm gonna need help to kill a demon." Chapter 13. Agent Hill surveyed the scene coolly from behind his sleek black shades. The local deputy had updated him on the situation after Hill showed up flashing his Area 51 credentials. Officially, Hill was here as an FBI investigator into the spate of killings. But his real purpose ran far deeper. He knew this creature's origins all too well. And he knew conventional firepower would just antagonize it, not neutralize it. He'd have to adapt his strategy to leverage the thing's weaknesses. But first, he needed to gather intel. "Where can I find Jeb Watkins?" he asked Mills. "He's had multiple encounters with it, correct?" Mills nodded. "At his ranch, I imagine, prepping for when that thing comes back." Hill raised an eyebrow. "Come back, you believe it will return?" "No doubt about it," Mills said grimly. "It's got some vendetta against Jeb and the sheriff. Finished with them, far as I could tell." "Interesting. Take me to speak with him now," Hill instructed. They drove out to the remote ranch. Jeb stood waiting at the gate, rifle in hand. His face went from suspicious to incredulous as the black sedan approached. Agent Hill stepped out and flashed his counterfeit badge. "M.R. Watkins, I'm Agent Malcolm Hill. I specialize in unique cases. I understand you've had multiple encounters with the suspect." Jeb's eyes narrowed. Didn't think the sheriff's call warranted FBI attention. "This case is unusual," Hill replied. "Now I need you to recount everything you know about this creature. Its abilities, weaknesses, motivations. Any details could be critical." Jeb hesitated before replying. "Don't know much, except it's lethal, cunning, and damn near unkillable. Bullets barely phased it." Hill nodded thoughtfully. And it seems to have focused its attention on you. Any idea why that may be? No idea, Jeb said. Just know it's coming back here eventually for my family. His knuckles whitened on his rifle grip. I see. Well, we will be setting a trap here then. Hill gestured to his trunk load of advanced weapons. My team knows how to handle this sort of threat. Jeb glanced skeptically at the futuristic-looking firearms. He had serious doubts about this odd out-of-towner, but he was desperate enough to accept any help he could get. Because this time when the demon returned, failure was not an option. He would destroy it or die trying, but he sure as hell would be taking it down with him. Jeb watched as Agent Hill's team set up equipment around his property, motion sensors, cameras, even landmines along the perimeter. He wasn't sure he trusted these shadowy government types, but they seemed to know more about stopping this creature than he did. As the setting sun stretched the shadows, Jeb's apprehension grew. His family was safe at an undisclosed location outside town, the one assurance he demanded from Agent Hill. Now all that was left was to wait. He sat silently on the porch, rifle in hand, as the agents made final preparations. He thought of all the things he still wanted to teach Jimmy about being a rancher. The dance recitals of Beth's he would miss. The lifetime of quiet moments with Sally, his stalwart partner, that they'd been denied. Agent Hill approached, cutting into his reverie. My team has this operation well in hand, Mr. Watkins. There's no need for you to remain in harm's way. Jeb kept his gaze fixed on the darkening horizon. I appreciate that, Agent Hill, but this demon has plagued my people long enough. I aim to be here to see it finished. Hill paused, then gave a somber nod. I understand. Know that no matter what happens here tonight, your family will remain safeguarded. Jeb finally met the man's gaze, calm resolution in his eyes. That's all I need to know. As full darkness descended, the ranch yard vanished from sight beyond the porch lamps. Jeb said a silent prayer for courage and steadied his grip on his rifle. A fierce finality filled him. Tonight, win or lose, his war against this evil ended here. Chapter 14. Midnight approached with still no sign of the creature. The agents patrolled the darkened ranch yard, weapons ready. Jeb remained unmoving on the porch, hyper-focused. Just past midnight, one of the motion detectors along the driveway perimeter triggered. Agent Hill gestured silently to his team, signaling them to fan out. Jeb felt his heartbeat quicken, muscles tensing. A second alarm sounded, then a third further away in the brush. The thing was testing them, probing for weaknesses. Jeb willed himself to breathe evenly, finger resting on his rifle's trigger guard. Without warning, the agents opened fire in unison towards the unseen threat. Tracer rounds lit up the darkness as an unearthly shriek split the night air. The creature burst from the shadows in a blur, zigzagging impossibly fast between spots of cover: the barn, the cattle pen, the pickup truck. The agents tracked its erratic path, energy beams illuminating the yard in pulses. But their advanced weapons seemed useless against the thing's speed. It moved like liquid darkness, bounding closer to the house with each pass. Jeb snapped out of his stupor and took aim as it scurried towards the tool shed just yards from the porch. He pulled the trigger, hitting its center mass. The creature stumbled, but instantly ricocheted to safety behind the shed. An instant later, the motion tracker on the roof exploded in a shower of sparks and plastic. It was toying with them. Hold your fire and keep moving. Agent Hill ordered his team calmly. Draw it out into the open. The pulsing energy beams died down as the agents adjusted their strategy. An eerie silence fell over the desert night. Then Jeb spotted a void skittering across the open barn doors. He fired a burst, driving it back into hiding. "It's hurting us," Hill muttered. "We're being maneuvered into a kill zone." He was right, Jeb realized with icy clarity. They had to regain control of this fight. Moving on instinct, he leapt from the porch and sprinted for the tool shed. The creature sprang out to meet his charge head-on. He dodged its raking claws and spun around behind it. "Now, hit it with everything," he roared. Blinding crossfire lit up the creature as it twisted and shrieked under the barrage. Then it collapsed into a smoldering mass, its unearthly screams dying on the night wind. Chapter 15. Jeb slowly approached the fallen creature, rifle trained on it. The thing lay motionless, a charred and oozing heap. Gerald, one of the agents, strode up next to him, energy rifle still pulsing. "Target neutralized," he said. "Looks like this hunt is OV." Gerald's words dissolved into a strangled gurgle. Jeb's eyes widened as he took in the fleshy barb protruding from the agent's jugular. He whirled to see the creature crouched on all fours behind them, flesh knitting itself back together even as its face seemed to melt and reforms. It shrieked triumphantly as Gerald collapsed, then burst towards Jeb faster than his eyes could track. Pain exploded through his shoulder as it slammed into him. They tumbled end over end before crashing hard against the side of the house. Jeb's rifle spun away into darkness. The creature pinned him by the throat, grinning with too many teeth glistening in the moonlight. Shadows danced at the edges of Jeb's vision as he choked for air. He had mere seconds to act before blackness consumed him. His hand scrambled desperately for anything to use as a weapon. Finding only a fist-sized rock, he smashed it up into the creature's bulbous skull. It reeled back with an angry hiss, ichor splattering. Jeb gasped air back into his starved lungs. As his vision cleared, dread sank into his gut. The thing had already healed the blow, bone shards clacking back into place beneath warped flesh. It seemed weakened, but still immortal. Jeb had hit this monster with everything imaginable: bullets, explosives, traps, his bare hands. At every turn it had resurrected itself, unslayable. He now realized the ugly truth. This thing could not be killed by any earthly means. Its obsidian eyes gleamed with malice and hunger as it slunk towards him again. Whether by its claws or the plane of existence it came from, he was damned to die tonight. All his struggle had only prolonged the inevitable. Jeb bowed his head and waited for the darkness to consume him. His only solace was knowing his family would live on, safe from this demon. He commended his spirit into the Creator's hands. "To your worst, demon," he whispered. "My soul is prepared." Chapter 16. But the killing blow never came. As Jeb knelt, resigned to his end, the night was shattered by a new voice. "Begone, foul creature," roared Pastor Mike Rhodes, arms raised like Moses before the Red Sea. Backlit by headlights, he advanced from the driveway, Bible held aloft. The creature recoiled with a serpentine hiss at the sight. "You hold no dominion here, spawn of Satan," the pastor proclaimed. "In the Lord's name I cast you out." He brandished a glistening cross amulet towards the cowering beast. It screeched as if burned, melting into the shadows. Mike helped Jeb to his feet, eyes alight. "Evil cannot bear the light and truth of God," he said. "My friend, will you stand with me to send this demon back to hell where it belongs?" Jeb swayed unsteadily, but gripped the pastor's offered hand, new strength surging through his exhausted body. "I'm with you," he said hoarsely. Pastor Rhodes placed the amulet around Jeb's neck. Then he produced a leather-bound book from his coat, a worn King James Bible. The creature shrieked from somewhere nearby as he held it aloft. "On my signal we charge and strike," the pastor said. "But have faith, the good Lord himself fights with us tonight." Jeb clasped the amulet, feeling power like electricity thrumming through it from the pastor's unyielding faith. He gave a determined nod. Pastor Rhodes bellowed a holy war cry and charged towards the writhing creature. Bible extended like a holy lance. He advanced by the light of the amulet around his neck. Jeb was at his side, emboldened by the righteous fury radiating from the man. The creatures scrambled back frantically from their divine onslaught, but had nowhere to hide now. The pastor's Bible struck it dead center with a flash of light. It collapsed, smoldering and convulsing, as he recited scripture over its prone form. "Please, Lord, cast this unholy abomination out," Rhodes thundered. With a last shrieking gasp, the creature's flesh sloughed away, leaving only a foul black vapor that seeped into the dirt. A calm settled over the desert. The pastor clasped Jeb's shoulder, their breath misting in the cold night air. "Your faith saved you tonight, my friend," he said gently, "and may have helped spare this land further evil." Jeb glanced around at the devastation the battle had wrought. "Maybe so, Pastor, but true evil don't die so easy." He turned his gaze back to the man, eyes grave. "Something tells me defeating real darkness takes more than one fight." Chapter 17. A faint rustling sound stirred Jeb from fitful slumber the next morning. Blearily, he realized he had passed out on the living room couch. Pastor Rhodes was gone, probably to tend to his church after the spiritual battle they'd waged last night. The sound came again from the back of the house, followed by a terrified gasp. Heart-lurching, Jeb scrambled off the couch and rushed to investigate, rifle in hand. Moving cautiously down the hall, he swept into the kitchen ready to fire. He nearly collapsed in shock and relief. Standing by the back door was a dazed, disheveled Sheriff Ana Lopez. Blood stained her torn uniform, but her chest rose and fell with life. "Ana, dear God," Jeb cried, lowering his weapon to embrace her shaking form. "That demon took you. I thought you were dead for sure." Ana slumped against him, seemingly unable to speak. Jeb helped her limp to a kitchen chair and pressed a glass of water into her shaky hands. After a few steps, her eyes regained a hint of clarity. "Jeb, you gotta alert Mayor Wilson. Tell him to evacuate everyone," she rasped urgently. "That thing I killed wasn't the only one." Jeb's gut turned to ice. "What do you mean? There's more of them?" Ana nodded, face haunted. "I only saw a glimpse of its lair after it took me, but there were chambers of glowing pods, all with those creatures inside. It's an infestation, Jeb." Jeb's mind reeled at the implications. The demon must have only been an infant, the first to emerge and feed. God knew how many more lay dormant nearby. Ana struggled to stand, wincing. "We've got no time. I need to gather whoever I can to get folks out before they hatch." Jeb gripped her shoulder, gravely meeting her determined gaze. "I'll find the mayor and whoever else can help evacuate. You just focus on getting strong quick as you can. We'll need that warrior spirit again before this is over." Anna clasped his hand with a grim nod, then hobbled off to find medical supplies. Jeb headed out to his truck, urgency electrifying his nerves. However many more of those hellspawn were out there, one thing was certain: if they made it out of those pods while people still remained in town, it would be a massacre. Chapter 18. Mayor Wilson's face drained of color as Jeb described the pods and impending invasion. He glanced through the blinds of his office window at the calm street scene outside, families loading groceries, sharing gossip at the cafe. An ordinary small-town morning, soon to be shattered. "My God, we're defenseless," he rasped. "Half the police force is down, we have no real firepower." His eyes refocused on Jeb, hardening. "But you seem to know how to kill these demons. What do you suggest?" Jeb hesitated, seeing the weight of leadership settling on the man's shoulders for the first time. "Get Sheriff Lopez whatever backup and weapons she needs when she's able. In the meantime, coordinate evacuation routes with the county. Use the radio, whatever it takes. Just get people moving quick and quiet, no panic." The mayor nodded, reaching for the emergency phone line. "I'll make it happen, and son, thank you for the warning." Jeb gave his shoulder a supportive clasp and left to gather his family. As he turned onto their street, smoke rose in the distance, the first visible sign of the coming chaos. He raced inside to find Sally glued to the radio, clutching the kids close. The moment her eyes met Jeb's, she knew. "Oh God, it found us, didn't it?" she choked out. Jimmy and Beth started to wail as Jeb hugged them tight. "I'll explain on the way, but we're getting you all out safe. Pack only what you need quick." As his family rushed to gather their bug-out bags, Jeb swept a photo album, important documents, and his grandfather's shotgun into a duffel. County roads out of the valley would be a nightmare soon. They'd take the back dirt trails through the mesas, just get as far from town as possible. Jeb was double-checking the house when a blood-curdling shriek split the air outside. His heart stuttered in his chest. It sounded almost like the cry of the first demon, but louder, mocking. The invasion had begun. Working fast, they roared out of town on the ranch trucks, oversized tires. But no back road could protect them from the horrors unfolding below. In the valley, pillars of black smoke towered over the tiny figures fleeing for their lives as the demons' terrible hunting cries echoed through the ravines. Watching hell swarm over his hometown, Jeb uttered a fervent prayer: "Just let some make it out alive, Lord. We can rebuild as long as we have life." Chapter 19. 3 days had passed since Serenity Valley was lost. 3 days of constant driving, scavenging, surviving. The dirt service road through the mesas eventually connected to a county highway choked with other shell-shocked evacuees. Jeb managed to get his family on an emergency relocation convoy to a FEMA shelter in the city. He stayed behind to join the volunteer militia headed back to retake their valley or die trying. If those demons spread further, nowhere would be safe. Sheriff Anna found Jeb among the ragtag defenders gathering on the highway that would carry them home. Her uniform was dusty but restored to order, and the light of determination had returned to her eyes. "Wasn't sure you'd be here," Jeb said, clasping her shoulder warmly. "Thought you'd be with your kin." She gave a bittersweet smile. "My sister and her little girls got out. Thank God, I'm needed here now." Her expression turned grim as she surveyed their meager battalion farmers and shopkeepers wielding hunting rifles alongside EMTs and half the surviving police force. Jeb followed her gaze. "It's a long shot, I know, but we gotta try, Sheriff, for those still trapped up there." Anna nodded solemnly. "These are good folks willing to die for their homes. If we stand together, we've got a chance." She turned to Jeb, eyes fierce. "But when we find the source of this evil, that's on us to finish." As the convoy reached the edge of town limits, a tense hush fell over the group. Anna ordered them to fan out on foot. "Remember, aim for the eyes or their underside," she said. "And God be with you all." Jeb took point with Anna as they crept between ravaged structures. Scraps of familiar lives littered the streets: a child's scorched doll, an abandoned mail truck, the darkened shell of Sally Me's diner. Each sign of the town's slow death steeled Jeb's resolve further. Then, from a collapsed ranch house crawled a little boy, no older than Jimmy. Jeb started to rush to him, then froze just below the skin, seemed to shift and pulse, as if a parasitic force moved beneath the human facade. The child's mouth split open in a fanged grin. Jeb recoiled in horror as the truth crashed over him: the demons could wear human form at will. And who knew how many souls they had already devoured and replaced? Chapter 20. Gunfire and screams erupted nearby as more of the human imposters revealed themselves to ambush the search parties. Jeb's mind raced. He couldn't just mow down every person he saw now. But hesitating to shoot meant letting the demons win. "We gotta fall back and regroup," Anna urged over the chaos, dragging Jeb away from the chuckling demon child. They managed to gather a dozen survivors in the alley behind the sheriff's office. Anna quickly outlined the horrific new tactic of possessing human victims. "So what do we do?" asked Deputy Chad, face streaked with soot. "How can we fight them now?" Anna exchanged an uncertain look with Jeb. They were in an impossible position. The evil here seemed to have no limits, but they had come too far to turn back now. Jeb stepped forward, voice steady. "I say we find where these things are coming from and take it out at the source. Cut off the head, the body dies." "Easier said than done," Anna replied warily. "We'd need to get to their nest unseen, avoid more ambushes." Jeb considered this. "The old mine where they found me, where you escaped, that's gotta be it. Tunnel deep to stay hidden." Anna looked thoughtful. "You just might be right, and I think I know how a small team could sneak in." 20 minutes later, Jeb found himself crammed into the cage of an old utility truck with Anna and 2 volunteers, Chad, and a seasoned hunter named Walt. They had bolted scrap metal around the exterior and loaded the bed with propane tanks rigged to blow. Walt revved the shuddering engine as Anna gave last-minute instructions. "Drive straight into that mine entrance and get as deep as you can. We'll be right behind you to finish off whatever's left. Everybody clear?" Solemn nods answered her. Jeb gripped the small Bible Pastor Rhodes had gifted him and prayed under his breath as Walt gunned the patched-up vehicle down the street. People and demons alike fled from their path. The truck screeched up to the yawning mine entrance, ancient timbers smashed aside by something large. Walt stomped the gas, and they tore into the dark tunnel. Evil shrieks echoed around them as things scattered deeper inside. Jeb braced himself as they slammed through a weak spot in a cave-in, breaching the inner sanctum. His blood turned to ice water. Lining the massive cavern were hundreds of writhing, pulsating egg sacs. and from them emerged the true forms of the demons, hunched, skeletal beings with talons like obsidian blades. "End it here, boys, now," Walt bellowed. As one, the men opened fire through the metal slats with their shotguns. Propane tanks ruptured and incinerated scores of the swarming monsters. But more just kept coming. With a savage war cry, Walt steered them straight into a dense cluster of eggs. A monstrous explosion rocked the confined space, collapsing part of the ceiling and flipping the truck. Smoking and battered, Jeb crawled from the overturned wreck, ears ringing. A few other volunteers had made it inside and were battling the remaining beasts. Past them, Jeb saw a pulsating vortex of black energy behind a translucent veil. The source. Gripping his amulet and Bible, he staggered towards it, drawing on every last bit of his strength and faith. With a primal roar, he smashed through the veil and hurled the Bible into the vortex's center. A shockwave ripped through the cavern, dissolving the remaining creatures and knocking the men off their feet. The swelling dark portal wavered, then imploded with an unearthly shriek. Silence descended on the decimated cave. They had won, but at a heavy cost. Helping the shell-shocked survivors up towards daylight, Jeb uttered a prayer of thanks. The demons were vanquished. Now came the more difficult work, rebuilding lives and faith from the ashes. Chapter 21. Weeks passed in a blur of funerals and memorials. But slowly, steadily, Serenity Valley began to heal and rebuild. The diner reopened. Farmers replanted rows. And families returned to reclaim their homes after the evil was cleansed. Jeb found solace working from sunup to sundown on restoration projects that kept his hands busy and his mind focused. In the evenings, he took comfort sitting on the half-rebuilt porch, sharing a drink with Pastor Rhodes as they reminisced about better times. But not all wounds could be mended with bricks and timbers. Jeb still tossed restlessly most nights, visions of demons haunting his dreams. Whenever he closed his eyes, that writhing black portal awaited. He yearned for just one full night's rest. The pastor seemed to sense his inner turmoil and invited him on a retreat deep into the mesas. A few days focused only on the Creator's presence could restore your soul, my friend, he suggested. And so Jeb had set out before dawn, only an old Bible and basic pack on his saddle. The desert bloomed with golden wildflowers after recent rains, vibrant and untamed. Jeb felt his anxiety start to ease as he traveled deeper into its embrace. By mid-morning, his only company was the occasional red-tailed hawk riding thermals overhead. The mesa's ancient stone faces stood sentinel, radiating calm. At a secluded spring hidden in a box canyon, Jeb set up camp. Kneeling streamside as the sun set, he let the raw beauty sink into his soul. The stillness here hallowed and humble, shrinking his human struggles and pains into perspective. He scooped up water sweet as communion wine and made his simple peace. Later, by firelight, Jeb finally glimpsed into the heart of this broken world, with new eyes now open to humanity's brokenness, but also to the boundless well of grace inviting him in to be remade. Here, far from everything familiar, Jeb found the one essential thing: light, wherever one has eyes to see it. Chapter 22. The journey back seemed to pass in a daze, Jeb's heart buoyant after days of solitude and spiritual renewal in the wilds. Even Serenity Valley looked refreshed, like a hardened soldier given leave to lay down arms and rest. Folks greeted him warmly as he rode down Main Street towards his nearly rebuilt home. At the sheriff's office, he tied up his horse and stepped inside to pay Anna a visit. She looked up from paperwork, smiling. Well, hey there, stranger, good to see you. How was your time away? Jeb chuckled. Real good for my soul, I'd say. How are things around here? Anna blew out a breath. No rest for the weary, you know how it is, but we're getting there. She stood, expression growing serious. Jeb, we need to talk. Lock the door and sit for a minute. Jeb did as she asked, perplexed. Anna lowered her voice. I trust you, Jeb, but I need to show you something that stays between us for now. She withdrew a nondescript case file from her locked file cabinet and opened it before him. Inside were photos of disturbing remains, humanoid skulls, and limbs unlike anything terrestrial. Anna pointed to one skull that still had glassy ebony eyes intact. Rancher found these burrowed on his back acres a week ago. No clue how long they'd been there. Jeb's gut twisted. No way any are still alive, right? Don't seem so, bones are pretty old, but it got me thinking maybe. Anna trailed off. Jeb nodded gravely, seeing her unspoken meaning. Maybe those demons weren't the first of their kind to visit here. He looked up at Anna. Makes you wonder what else could be hiding in our own backyard. She held his gaze. My point exactly. I'd like you to help keep an ear out for anything strange. Your experience gives you perspective I lack. Jeb considered this. I ain't looking for more trouble, but forewarned is forearmed. Whatever darkness is lurking out there, we'll face it together. He stood, and they shook firmly. As Jeb stepped back outside into the bright daylight, his shadow seemed to stretch before him, a dark, nameless reflection of the light ahead. With calm resolve, he continued onward down the dusty street. Evil still lurked in this world, perhaps closer than anyone knew. But like the proud town around him, he would heal and rebuild, come what may. The end.